All right, let's get going here. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got a nice intimate group to start off today, which is a good thing actually for the topic that we're going to be discussing today. This recording is also going to be going on our news site, integratedcarenews.com. So just keep in mind that other folks will be hearing what's going on. So I am Naftali Serrano. I'm the Chief Executive Officer here at CFHA. As you all know, our mission is to promote integrated care as a standard of care across the country. And our goal is to support healthcare professionals doing this. And so it makes sense from our standpoint to talk about, especially in these times, what all these changes related to the pandemic and working from home have, how they've affected the workforce that's working on integrating care. So I invited a couple of friends and CFHA members and one CFHA staff to talk a little bit about some of these adjustments. So the way we're going to structure this, I'm going to give a few introductory comments related to the topic, and then I'm going to give each of the panelists some time to talk about their experiences with these with the change to working from home. And then we're going to have a little bit of interaction time around question and answer. And throughout the entire time, I want to encourage anybody on to communicate via the chat. I'm going to be keeping tabs on the chat. So if you have thoughts, ideas, things like that. And then given the small group, we'll also just open it up as well to folks to participate verbally if they want as well. So first, just to set the stage, I don't think I need to really do a lot of setting the stage, given that we're all experiencing what we're talking about here today. This has actually been a challenge even for those of us who are used to working from home, which is really interesting. So I'm one of those people. I have worked from home really for the most part, for the better part of the last 4 to 5 years. But this has been still an additional adjustment, in large part for several reasons. And I think as I broke it down into 3 different sort of areas that have been challenging for me. One is just the lack of physical separation between work and home. But then I've been realizing it's not just that, it's the lack of physical separation and psychological separation between work, home, and the world. So all of that is being affected by the same kind of stress. So at work, in my work life, I'm sort of doing COVID-related stuff or having to make adjustments related to COVID-related issues. And that's happening in the same physical space as my home. In my home life, I'm having to make those adjustments as my kids transition and now are several weeks into doing online learning, learning in quotes, and adjusting to new family routines as a result of them not being able to see friends as easily, et cetera. So all those adjustments are happening there. Adjustments with my partner and her schedule has not changed very much because she's an emergency medicine physician, so she's doing her normal work, but a lot of her work meetings are now from home, et cetera, so she's home a whole lot more. So there's more people in the home. And then the world stress and the news and all of the stuff related to our community life, our church life, all of that has been affected by the same stress and all the adaptations. So we do church over Zoom now. That changes all of that. So the separation both physically and psychologically of all those things, I think, has introduced a significant amount of stress in pretty much every area of our lives, certainly in my life. And then the other category that I think of are the brand new routines. Like there's been so many new routines in each of these areas of life. Certainly from patient care standpoint, I know many of you have experienced lots of just brand new routines about how you engage care, initiate care, introduce care, do follow-up care, etc. So lots of adaptations and changing that. Changes in team communication, how you communicate with your primary care providers, how you communicate with the other teammates, how you communicate with your clerks, your medical assistants, etc. And then just like simple changes that don't seem like a lot, but actually are, like how you have lunch and how you fit lunch into your routine, like that changes. In a way, Zoom and virtual reality is sort of so efficient that it almost gets harder to fit lunch in sometimes when you're kind of running from one virtual meeting to another. And along with that, just self-care in general, just how you do self-care. Lastly here, I think the other piece that I've noticed that's a challenge in the work from home space, and probably where most of my own personal life hacks have been, I'm really interested to hear what yours are, but is just the idea that in life you need to carve out space and time to honor each part of your life. So my home and my kids deserve time and space carved out for them. And my work deserves to be honored with time and space for it. I deserve time and space as well. And other parts of my life, my relationships, deserve that time and space as well. And given how everything's been reconfigured and how much of that occurs in the same space now, I think it makes it much more challenging to very mindfully and intentionally actually honor those spaces. So I'll give you one of the key life hacks that I've come up with before we transition here to our panelists, which is that I have very intentionally tried to set good boundaries around those spaces as much as I can. And when I'm transitioning from one part of my life to another, I very intentionally do some meditation or mindfulness into that space, away from the space that I've just been and into the next space. So for example, in the mornings, I've incorporated a little bit of a meditation routine. It's not very long, it's just a few minutes, but I do some deep breathing and I express gratitude for the work that I'm going to do that day. I think about the day ahead of me that I'm going to do, and I express gratitude for it, and then I say, okay, now I'm going to enter that space. And so in the same way, at the end of my workday, as I'm leaving work and entering home, again, it's all in the same space. But as I'm doing that, I'm also taking a moment to reflect on my day, to express gratitude for it, to sense what's happening with me emotionally around any of that, and then sort of transition into gratitude and thankfulness and expectation for what my time with my kids will look like, or my time with my wife will look like. And that's, I think, been very helpful just to provide space and time to honor each of those things. So I'd like to switch now to our panelists and just get a sense of how they have been responding to working from home. And we're going to start with Dr. Shay Stacer, who's all the way out on the West Coast, apparently up earlier than she normally is, given the new work from home schedule she has carved out. So Shay, tell us a little bit about your responses and reactions to life from working from home.
Yeah, I really resonate with a lot of what you have just spoken about in terms of boundary setting. I'm a really big fan of physical cues. It's important for me, or has been important, to have a very specific space to do work in for many reasons. I mean, one, to have a door that closes for patient confidentiality, for me to have a space, and to transit. It's helped me transition in and out of like work and home. Now, I'll say that with a lot of hesitation as well. I am a divorced mother of a 9-year-old, a 4th grader, And so when I have my daughter, I'm here on my own. And on the days that I'm seeing patients, that those are can be incredibly stressful. With this, like you said, the quotes are exactly right. Online learning. Um, the greatest challenge for me has been trying to navigate seeing patients and also getting a 9-year-old sorted and navigated through a system that is really not very well set up. I really appreciate what the teacher has done so far, but honestly, in her classroom, there has been very little and actually zero instruction. And so it's been really difficult with a kiddo that has some academic struggles already to navigate those days of going between, her trying to do school and me seeing patients. Admin days are a little bit easier than that, but it's that specific transition has been pretty brutal.
I always forget that. You think it'd been enough Zoom meetings, so no, you need to unmute yourself. So Martha Saucedo is a licensed clinical social worker. She is a project manager for technical systems here at CFHA and is a BHC at Access Community Health Centers in Madison, Wisconsin. So Martha, what are your initial thoughts and reactions to this sort of work from home and how it's affected you?
So I think, again, I resonate with what Shay has said and also you, but for me, one that has hit really hard is everybody working on the same place, right? So I do have an office where I work, and that is helpful. And it has some doors, but they're window doors. So I know what's happening, and they come and do faces to me. And I'm like, no, I mean, I cannot attend you guys right now. But also my husband is working, in the other room. So the kids, my daughter needs to practice violin, and at that time there's a meeting that he has, and I have a meeting too. And then my son is having also like live online classes as well through Zoom. So to be able to respect each other's spaces and activities without, when they're overlapping, like when the violin needs to be in the background because she has that class online, but my husband has a meeting which needs to be quiet. So how do you navigate that, being respectful of everyone? And that has involved a lot of endless communication and changing, because we think this is how it's going to work today, and the next day the plan that we all created is not working. So adjusting and readjusting, and just be patient with each other, that we are all trying to fit each other, our own work, and respect of the work of others. But it's challenging. It's hard when everybody's on the same place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we all know a lot of the challenges. This meeting is hopefully about sharing some of the life hacks. So I want to invite those who are listening in to post in the chat, if possible, life hacks, things that you've found in this time, adaptations that have worked for you. So post those on the chat if at all possible. And then I want to ask our panelists here for their favorite life hacks. What are the things that you have found to be helpful? And it could be anything. It could be things related to routines that you've developed. It could be specific ideas that you've developed with family members. It could also be things you've done related to patient care and making that maybe have a little bit less friction related to that piece of the work. So Martha, I'll start with you. What are some sort of tips and tricks that you felt have worked for you?
I think even before all this, I really need structure. And that was a big piece that got broken. So I really need to start and make a new structure of my day and my routine. And based on that, have really clear communication with my family members and explaining to them when I really they need to be respectful if the door is closed, because I'm, seeing patients via telehealth, or it's a meeting, and if I actually make different signs on the door so they know the level of privacy that I need. Like it's really like I'm seeing patients, like you cannot come. I'm in a administrative meeting, it's not as high intense privacy, or the doors are closed because I need some silence to keep working, but I can come in. So I put those kind of notes and signs, red, yellow, and green, and they know how intense of the privacy I need for that. And checking in with everyone, like I'm doing good in respecting them, how they're doing in respecting me. I really give a lot of kudos to my 11-year-old because I think it's harder for her. So when she does had a good day respecting our routine, I will at the end of the day try to applaud that and do something for her, because it's really hard for her to do it. Also, I will say there's days that they don't go well, and just be kind to myself and others when that doesn't happen, and laugh about it. But I will say I created a structure for myself again because I needed that, communicating clearly to my family members. And the other thing I needed to add was to set an alarm to disconnect myself, because I can be here working until 8, 9 p.m. and it's just so easy to keep working and doing stuff. So I really have to make an effort to set an alarm, and when that alarm goes off, I will continue tomorrow. Because if I don't give that break to myself, nobody's going to do it for me. And I started to overwork in the beginning, and that started really affecting my mood, affecting my sleep, and I was creating another problem by not setting that boundary to myself. So
those are some great life hacks. I love that idea of posing the red, yellow, green. That's a very tangible way of, because it's true. There are certain meetings you could be interrupted with, and then those patient encounters you do not want to be interrupted in those. That's a great life hack. And then I think the other piece that struck me, Martha, that you're doing very well at, it sounds like, is just being mindful about that structure that you need. And that applies to that whole idea of overwork as well, right? Because I think I felt the same way when I started initially. I was working much more than I usually worked, responding to things, and it was easy to do that in a way, right? It was sort of seamless to just be doing the work because the laptop's there,
Yeah.
But you can't sustain that over the long haul. Yeah. Great thoughts, Shay, and great thoughts online as well. We're going to get to some of those chat comments that you guys are putting up there. But Shay, what are your favorite life hacks? What's made this really work for you?
I share a lot of similar approach to what Martha was talking about. I have an in session sign that goes up on my door. And with a 9-year-old, that's the age where they still require a lot of prompting, a lot of looking ahead. And honestly, that's not my forte. I'm kind of a like, fly by the seat of my pants sort of person, and pretty spontaneous. So it's really challenged my ability to organize and to think a step ahead when it comes to working from home and how that impacts my daughter. One thing that I really noticed that I already struggled with was guilt around working. So even just working a regular full-time job, I have a kid who will point out, she comes to my clinic after, that's where the school bus drops her off. And so as it is, she's really used to me working a lot, even though I'm just working sort of normal full-time. And what I find is that kind of increased the guilt, because now she's here, and when she needs something and I'm working, or if I'm seeing patients, they have to take priority over when I'm just doing administrative work. I can help her and I can stop what I'm doing. And so I'm finding that the frequency of my having to say, honey, I really can't do that right now, I have to see a patient. There are times that she's said in the past that she, sort of feels like patients can come before her. And so having that really real discussion of, that's, validating, that's really challenging when you're more wanting my attention or when you're needing something from me. And it's a conversation that we started, before, but I find that the guilt that I feel is a little more present now because of the frequency. And what I've really had to do, which I feel very privileged and lucky to be able to do, since I am the director of our program, is I really dialed down expectations. I think one of our attendees commented on that. We are not going to work in the same way that we normally work in the clinic. My productivity cannot be the same. Everything takes a little more time. I email, my after visit summaries and suggestions, and I email handouts and PDFs, and that takes another, 10, 15 minutes. I'm not seeing patients in the same way that I was before. And so I have my daughter for a week on, week off. I make up for some of that on the weeks I don't have my daughter. I'll just kind of like rail through a bunch of things. In the weeks that I have her, I set the limit to 4 scheduled patients. And I, might be able to take a handoff. I can do PCP curbsides. I can do some other things that are patient oriented on those days. But I found that if I see more than 4 patients, plus I usually have an advisory panel meeting or supervision meeting, I can't go hour to hour and not have my kid completely ignored for the whole day. And that's just the reality. So I really just gave myself permission to not work in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly validating and on point. And everybody's going to have a different situation, right? I mean, in your case, you have a lot of leadership responsibilities as well. And I want to just kind of highlight that, right? Because a lot of the weight of leadership is actually things like thinking. And in a time when we are doing a lot of thinking, especially a lot of anxious thinking and very detailed thinking, that's part of work, and that takes from us in that. So absolutely, I think it's really, really important to titrate how much work you can do and not expect that every day is going to be the exact same amount of effort and work that you can do in this. Some things feel more efficient in this style of working, and some things really drain us and take a lot more. And I'll let you respond more here in a moment, but the other thing I resonated so much with you was just that guilt. And Martha actually wrote a blog post on our Integrated Care News site about this topic, because guilt is very, very prevalent these days because of this constant multitasking. We were a multitasking generation to begin with, but this is upped it to a different level. And having that feeling of seeing your kids, I literally, one of my life hacks here is I avoid seeing my kids as much as I can during the day. I have older kids, so mine are 11 and up. But I avoid seeing them because I realized that seeing them induced guilt every time I saw them. And it was like every time I saw them, like my insides would just sink, because I felt my parent role wanting to pop out and be there for them. And they're fine. They're fine on their own mostly, and they know how to get to me. And I just have had to give myself permission, let them do their thing. I know it's tough. It's tough for everybody, but they'll be okay. You check in with them when you're ready. And that's a hard thing to do for a dad who loves his kids.
And we have to add to the formula that we also need self-care. Like on top of the work, on top of being a parent, you also need that time for yourself. And then that guilt increases when you actually want to take a walk on your own, or need that time out for you, right?
Absolutely. Shay, did you have something more you wanted to add to that?
I did, but I've since forgotten.
Yeah.
No worries.
You saw you unmute yourself, so I thought maybe. So I just want to quickly turn here before I ask you a different set of questions here. I want to turn here to some of the comments, because they've been really great comments. So, Eric, a good friend from North Carolina, talked about just simple life hack like noise canceling headphones. Like little stuff like that that I found makes a difference when you feel like you're problem solving specific aspects of the problem of working from home. Absolutely. Noise canceling headphones works. If you're doing extensive telephone work, which most of us are doing these days as well, you should be using earbuds at the very least. You shouldn't be holding a phone to your ear. Hopefully nobody's doing that. And Samantha, absolutely great point. And actually, this is one thing, if you guys could comment about how you manage the physicality of the work, right? Because when we're in clinic, we're used to walking around, we're used to kind of physically having spaces to wander through. A lot of the times now we're in the same space and room. So going outside multiple times a day becomes a key life hack, right? And scheduling those in and doing that guilt-free, right? Either guilt from, oh, I'm supposed to be working, or guilt from my kids need me, or whatever. Those things are really pretty crucial. And then, what was it? Yeah, Rita shared just a few of her approaches to kind of what I talked about earlier about honoring the spaces and times, right? Doing a little bit of journaling before the date gets going about how she's going to show up for herself, her family, her values. That's a great way of honoring time and space and being intentional and mindful about how you're going to end up doing that. And then just one more here before we get back to the conversation. I love this one as well. Samantha really did a good job of kind of going through a lot of the routine changes that she's engaged in now, right? So we're for those of us doing BAC work, there's definitely a lot more scrubbing schedule work, right? Because you're not going to depend naturally on the warm handoffs. And just as you're scrubbing those schedules, you're doing even more thinking around who are folks that might need our care. And I just want to point out that all of that takes time and effort to do, extra time and effort. It doesn't show up that way, but you have to understand all these routine changes are taxing. Yeah. So go ahead, Sam.
I have one more, Naftali, that came up, and it's come up in a couple articles I've read as well about sort of working from home, that I think is pretty important. At least it has been for me, and that's not comparing yourself to others. It's a common one that we discuss with our patients, but one that, I started doing a wellness trail walk with our medical director every Tuesday, which was a really important touch point for me to, when we first started that, it had been 5 weeks since I'd been in the clinic. And we have this wellness trail that's attached to the clinic. So it was the first time I had been there, which was a really strange feeling, because that's been my home for 6 years. And I really realized how much I depend on that environment and those people to kind of keep me feeling, grounded and productive. But it was really funny because he said something to me. I was really struggling that week. I think I cried every day that week because my daughter was having a hard time with school. I had too many patients. I felt like I was failing everyone. And he said to me something like, this one of the employees has 4 kids and she doesn't miss a beat. She just remains so productive. She's doing even more work than she was doing before this. And I just had this feeling in my chest of, I already felt like I was failing. And then that sort of added that piece. And I really had to just be, gentle with myself, step back from that initial reaction and come back to, that's great. I'm really glad that she's able to navigate this. And it doesn't say anything about me that right now I'm having a hard time. And, 2 weeks later, I'm having less of a hard time because I've, had to create new things and be creative with that process. But it's something that's come up in several articles that I've read too, is just being very careful not to compare what you're able to do with somebody else.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb kind of for any time in life. but it's especially true now because our situations are incredibly unique, both clinic side on our work side, but also our home situation side. And along with that, I think we have to show that grace to ourselves, but also would encourage people to show it to others as well. We just need extra grace all around. And I would say that actually many of these challenges will get actually even a little bit more complicated because as we return, as states open up and as things change, there's going to be more grace needed for how individuals adapt and how we each adapt to things like maybe spending some more time in the clinic and some doing remote work. What that's going to look like itself will induce some anxiety and stress for all of us. So I want to invite folks, thank you so much for the stuff on the chat. If you have comments you want to make, if you want to say something, please put on the chat, hey, I have something to say, and we're happy to hear from you and unmute you. But also if you have questions or things specifically about areas of your life that you still had some issues with kind of finding life hacks for. It's not that we're experts here, but we can share our collective expertise in the last 6 weeks or more than that, actually, of doing this work. So post those on the chat if you'd like to talk and if you have any questions as well. To the panelists, I want to just introduce an additional layer onto this because I think this is an important component that I'm not sure I've found a good life hack for, which is, part of what we're experiencing and working from home is the strain of dealing with the outside world and all of the sort of collective anxiety that is out there related to things like the economy, the politics of the situation, the sort of headlines that appear each day in the news, or even just the proximal things like, this week, some of my kids' activities started up. And so my daughter started swimming yesterday, and my other daughter may be going back to gymnastics on some sort of limited basis. And on our neighborhood's pool committee, and we have to decide what to do with opening the pool this year. And that stuff brings with it just a different level of stress that affects us in general. So do you guys have some life hacks for how you deal with this collective anxiety that doesn't have to do with work, but I'm telling you, it affects work because it sucks bandwidth from what I can do day to day. So do you guys have any thoughts about that?
So I think for me, I've been trying to recognize throughout the years how I feel. And this has been like my big test. Like I have physically to know where I'm feeling the anxiety, and I know where I feel in my body, but like I said, I've been kind of training myself to discover that through the years. And this has been my big test to see if I actually doing it well or not. So be in touch of myself. And when I do feel that I'm actually getting anxious about what's going around me, I go back to what I can control. So at that point, I either limit news or limit those type of conversations. I have said to friends when they were going to do in a Zoom social event, I have told to some of them, let's talk about other things. Like if we're going to be talking about this, like that's not even helpful for me. So be mindful of what it's been creating more anxiety to me and set those boundaries. So meditation for me helps because it helps me recognize if I'm feeling anxious and how to come back to the things that I can control. Yes, I completely agree with you. There's a collective anxiety and we can get sucked in so easily, but we cannot control it either. Like even if I get more anxious or try to go and do something, I'm not gonna solve it. So I come back to what I can control. So meditation helps me, reducing or setting boundaries of what I'm watching, what I'm hearing, and get out in nature when the weather permits. So walks, just nature really helps me, and it kind of set me about the tone to be neutralized again, and not feel, kind of relieve that anxiety that I'm, absorbing from the environment. But I don't have it right all the time. Some days I'm successful about it, other days I'm not. And I will go back to what Shay has shared, be very gentle with myself and know that maybe tomorrow will be better.
Great.
Yeah, I'm very intentional about what kind of input is in my environment, and even more so now. I have done that for quite a while, as far as doing many of the things that we recommend to patients. I take in news minimally. I do sort of a New York Times once a day run through that gives just point by point a general, synopsis of what's going on. And that's pretty much it. I don't watch local news. I don't really watch any other news. I'm very intentional about what comes up in my social media. So I do use social media. It's very curated. It always has been. I don't have, as far as if you were to look on my feed, like all is fairly well in the world, minus the general things that are going on. But I really stay away from stuff that might grab my attention to discharge kind of anxiety or aggression in an unhealthy way. I don't have the time or energy to argue on the internet or with people about things that, just like Martha was saying, generate more anxiety. So I really try to be very intentional about that input. And Martha, I agree with you. This has been a really big test of, over the years of doing clinical work, you learn to compartmentalize. And if you don't, you're going to sink. And so, we use that skill already. At this point in my career, I feel like I've gotten really good at separating the anxiety and trauma of my patients and the stories at work, and not transitioning them to home. And people will ask me, especially early career clinicians that I might supervise, how I do that. And I'm not entirely always sure how to answer them, except that it was cultivated over years of essentially a mindfulness practice when you break it down. But the idea of watching where my mind is wandering, and when I'm at home, I really need to be present. And that goes back to the whole, sort of guilt thing too. So if you allow that anxiety to carry with you too much, then the rate of likelihood of burnout is going to increase so much. So it takes a pretty, it's not that it never happens, but now I find that it's the really tragic stories that might become kind of intrusive for me at home, or perhaps something that's a little more unexpected, like a suicide attempt or something like that, that maybe we didn't see coming. Those will peek their heads out when I'm at home. But otherwise, I feel like I've really had to continue to hone in on that ability to just shut off work, shut off the stories, close the door to my office. I only come in here when I'm working, and be very careful about what kind of input I'm receiving when I'm not at work.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic guidance, and just helpful as a reminder. I think how important it is to set those good boundaries around the environment and how you're allowing it in. It's pretty insidious how easily that stuff can get in. And you're absolutely right that I think a key piece is sort of deciding, Shay, that I don't have space or time or energy for that right now. That's not living according to my values to give that space or time or energy. Now, that does get difficult, and just want to recognize that there's folks who are dealing with very proximal bad news. It may be just things that are happening in their workplace, right? Financial issues with their clinics or things like that that are pretty difficult. But then I think that's where I think what Martha said is really important. you want to be really mindful and cultivating mindfulness practices around what you can control, and honing in on those spaces versus devoting a lot of time or energy to those spaces that you really can't control, or those things and situations that are just not not in your wheelhouse. Yeah. I want to talk here in a minute about what your thoughts might be to transitioning back to the physical space, because I think that's, as I said, another challenge. But before that, I'll turn my attention here to the chat real quick. Eric made a good comment here. Limiting in, and I think this is your point, Shay, about curating your news sources. That's something that I've definitely found. In fact, something occurred to me along the lines of what Eric's writing here, that the news feed that I use, so I use Apple News, and so it has a bunch of different things. It'll throw in New York Times article, Wall Street Journal, Wall Street Post, CNN, and all this stuff. And I realized that the format of the way that a lot of social media and feeds like this are arranged themselves communicate sort of a significant amount of anxiety. I mean, you'll see these pictures of dramatic things, and you'll see these dramatic headlines. And if you kind of look at it objectively at the end of the time, like nothing really big has happened or changed from the day before. It's just the way everything's arranged kind of gives it this sense of importance. And you have to kind of not only choose the content, but for me, I'm realizing I need to choose the right visual format so that when I look, my brain is not alerted as if there's some sort of like big danger or big thing that I need to pay attention to. But instead I look to the good content that's there that may actually give me some good information. So yeah, Eric's comment is, yeah, if someone's watching a lot, just really, really limit your time. And then Jeff's point about using reputable sources is really important. Now, obviously, everybody has a very different definition of what a reputable source is in our country. But either way, a source that doesn't feed into that collective anxiety is probably a good source to stay with. So really important key points. All right, so let's transition here a little bit to what you might see going forward. Now I'm going to start with you, Shay, because one of the things that struck me as I've talked to you over the several weeks of doing this work is that you really like this. So it sounds to me like they're going to drag you back to the clinic kicking and screaming if they're able to do that. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, about why you like it and what that's done for your life, but also what it might look like either for you or your staff to, come back into clinic, and what that would look like as far as, needing new life hacks to deal with that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that really came as a surprise to me, because I've really prided myself on enjoying the barely controlled chaos of primary care. I love being part of the team. I love working with providers. I love having people around. I have no desire to go into full-time private practice where it would just be me all day. And yet I have really enjoyed significant parts of this process. And I do see this in some ways as a job extender for me. And I think that speaks a little bit to, I was starting to feel a bit burned out. I had a turnover of BHC staff that was kind of beyond my control and not really my, anything that the program did. I was feeling, starting to get weighed down. And I think that what this did was provided a little bit of padding that I didn't fully realize I needed. I'm a very, I'm like I was telling Neftali when we logged on this morning, I'm not a morning person. I'll do it. I'll get up in the morning because I have to. But if not, I'm a night owl. My 9-year-old's a night owl. And We have a household that could easily stay up a little bit longer and sleep in a little longer. And what I have done is kind of shift my day a little bit, not wildly, but it's given me the ability to, my first patient's at 10, and I'm not awake, very long before that, and that's not for everybody, but that's just the way it works for me. And then also some of my productive hours are, much later at night. And so what I found before is I was still using those productive hours for work, but then I was also putting in a 9-hour day in the clinic. And then that was increasing my burnout. And so what I've been able to do is really utilize the periods of time where I feel the most productive, but also not go far outside of the normal 40-hour work week. So I might be able to attend to some things at home that I really felt like I was missing, particularly as a single person and having a house and such to take care of. I feel like I'm able to attend to those things and also, get quite a bit of work done. So I don't know that I would want to do this 100% of the time, but I left last week. I had to get out for my birthday. I went and stayed overnight a couple hours south on the coast. And instead of rushing back to the clinic while I was in my Airbnb the next day, I stayed the day. I slept in, I saw 3 patients, did 2 PCP consults and a whole bunch of tasks, all from the patio of my Airbnb, overlooking the ocean. And it was awesome. I loved it. And so I love this newfound ability. I'm a bit restless in general and a wanderer. So I love the idea of being able to pick up and perhaps leave for a week and be somewhere else and still be there for my patients and still communicate with providers. And so there's parts of it that have worked really well and that I feel like my visits have translated very, very close to real life.
Well, it's all real life. It's just virtual.
Yeah, virtual.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I'd like to read Rita's comment here. I live in Montana, have a 3-hour commute. Wow. And really enjoyed repurposing this commute time into self-care time. Good for you, Rita. That's fantastic. Yeah, that would make a huge difference in your life. My hope is that I've reestablished some good self-care practices that she can continue when she's required to go back to the office. So nervous about what things will look like moving forward. So Rita, we're there with you. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of people nervous about what it's going to look like for lots of different reasons. But some of them just for exactly that simple reason that people's commute, even if it wasn't an hour and a half, even a 45-minute commute, a half-hour commute makes a big difference in a day. And once you start actually experiencing a different kind of way of life and realize, boy, I could really use this time. I actually need this time. I think actually, I would say a lot of us have experienced the insanity of our former lives. And ironically enough, because this is such a stressful time, there's some elements that are very sane about this. And that's hard to feel like you need to give up. So good on you, Rita, for recognizing that. And I would say, yeah, do everything you can to figure out a way to bring that sanity back to your life, even if you do need to go back. And I will say, I mean, I'm definitely encouraging clinics to be flexible. So advocate for yourself. I know that Shay is going to be doing that for herself. If there's a way to mix the work, because the truth is a lot of patients have also recognized that this is a really good way to work for them to see a provider. So the demand is certainly going to be there. Obviously, there's things we're going to have to work out around related to team relationships and things like that. But I think it's worth a conversation for folks like you, Rita, to figure out a way to combine maybe some of this with that. Now, other folks are also going to be stressed about other things, like just being safe in the clinic, for example, particularly if you do have an underlying medical condition, or even if you don't and just don't feel comfortable, or just dealing with a bunch of people in masks all day long. All of that can be stressful as well. So, Martha, just turning to you here briefly, Going forward, I don't know if Access has had any discussions about bringing people back in yet, or things like that. But does that bring a sense of, I don't know, stress or anxiety or just a new adjustment to your thought as well?
Yeah, I really think things will not be like before. I mean, it's gonna be another new norm that we're gonna be, having to adjust. There's been those conversations. They haven't set up a date yet, but even just like, should we wear scrubs? We BHG, they didn't wear scrubs before, so adjustments as to where you're gonna dress, how we're gonna protect each other. We were very used. Our huddles are like, we were all together, right, with the BHC and the providers. That's definitely going to change. So if we go back to clinic, it's going to be a different, what we're seeing in February. It's going to be totally different. So that adjustment needs to happen. And I will just encourage, to have that open communication with your team, with the people you're working, because something may feel comfortable for someone, but not for others. And it's important to kind of lay those out. Like you're saying, I feel like you don't feel comfortable, but you have to go back to work. How are you going to manage that? You have to bring that up. So I don't think things are going to be like before. Yes, we're going to be physically there, but it's going to look very different as it was, early this year.
And that's tough because many folks who are going back and want to go back are going back for the intimacy, right? But that's not going to be there in the same way. So then that's going to introduce a new level of adjustment and strain. So I think one general theme that we can pull from this is that this is going to require a lot of mindful practice around your responses to these adjustments and voicing, and when appropriate, voicing your feelings about that. Sometimes just to yourself, like, oh man, this really sucks to see everybody in gowns and masks and things like that. But in like Rita's case, like just voicing, hey, there's an adjustment I need to make in my life, and I need to figure out who to talk to about making that happen, or we need to make adjustments in how this in-clinic work happens to make it less, have less friction around that. So I think if we're mindful about what's happening and see it for what it is, we'll be able to respond to it in an adaptive fashion versus feeling stuck, which I'll be honest, there have been many times during this last series of months where I've felt stuck, in large part because I couldn't identify like what's going on. Why do I feel so crazy right now? So yeah, I give myself permission to be stuck every once in a while because that's just life. But I don't want to be there for too long. We're just going to have to continue to be adaptive about it. All right, we're nearing the end here. So any final thoughts related to this whole big adjustment of working from home? I think this has been a fantastic conversation, by the way, but any thoughts from either of our panelists or any of the folks in the chat as well?
I would just say, be kind with yourself. That's the first thing we forget about it. And that aligns to the guilt that you were sharing, Shay, that we're not kind to ourselves. So if we start with that, I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, and I think seeing the opportunity, as challenging as this was, and I moved my department to remote status across just a few days, and did that, kind of on my own because the clinic was so strained with trying to figure out the medical staff piece. That I've really seen this huge opportunity, especially I'm in a rural area of 26,000 people, and it's been very hard to connect folks with the right clinicians to treat their specific problems. And so I think this is going to be a game changer for rural areas that have already been just dipping their toes or hadn't quite gotten into telehealth, that now patients were forced to get used to it. And I think it's going to open up the possibility for us to really widen our scope of care. And I'm pretty excited to see how that rolls out.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great positive note to end on. The reality is that there has been a lot of positive that has come of this situation. Once we kind of clear our way from the collective anxiety piece, and certainly from the reality of the threat that COVID-19 presents to us, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how people have an opportunity to craft their work so that it works better with their home. And I think we're seeing that if you have the right life hacks, you can make this work, that it works well. But you do have to be mindful about your decisions, about how you manage that, how you handle that, how you arrange that, how you work your way through a day of working from home. So good times are ahead. I keep reminding myself of that. Good times are ahead. We just have to get through this piece. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, Shay, Martha, for your insights. I know it's been helpful. And for those of you who attended today, thank you as well. We really appreciate you coming. And for those of you listening on integratedcarenews.com, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you at our next community meeting.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.